Hi, my name is Sarah Hammond, and today I'm presenting on Solfanisba and Wisola. She was born in 1528 and was one of 7 children, and she specialized in portraits. She did self-portraits, individual portraits, and group portraits. But it was really her group portraits that made her become famous because she was credited with introducing a new type of group portrait. Up until this point, group portraits were just a group of people posing for a portrait, all staring at the painter. It was very generated, it was unnatural, unrealistic setting. It wasn't something you would just walk in on in everyday life. So she decided to paint the chess game, which I'll get to in a minute. But as you will see, it's a much more realistic painting. It's something that you may actually walk in on. But before I get to that, another interesting fact is she actually died in 1625 at the age of 97. At the time, she was the second oldest Italian painter, and it was actually very rare to live to your late 90s back then. This is the chess game I was telling you about. As you can see, it's not a portrait that was typical at the time. It's not a painting where everybody's staring and just waiting for their painting to be taken. It's actually a group of people engaging in an activity. It's as if you would just walk through the forest and happened upon this. The middle sister's in the middle of an argument. The youngest sister is looking on, laughing at what she's saying. The governess is looking in, concerned to see what's happening with the sisters. And the oldest sister seems to be the only one that even noticed that anyone stopped by. So like I said, it's a much more realistic setting, something that you may actually happen upon. But getting into the actual painting itself, one of the things that stands out is for pictorial space. It's a lot of overlapping, showing that it is a 3D space. As you can see, looking at the chessboard, underneath the chessboard is a tablecloth, which is obviously on some sort of table because you can see it sticking out, the shape of it sticking out on the sides, which has a chessboard on top of it. On top of that has chess pieces, and on top of that is the arms of the girls. So you can see the overlapping of objects shows that each object has their own space. The same with the left hand of the eldest sister. You can see that her hand is slightly wrapped around a chess piece, but because it's not completely closed, it shows there is air around there as well, really giving it a three-dimensional feeling. Another thing that stands out is the linear perspective in it. If you look at the chessboard, the squares at the very front of the chessboard are very, very equal and they're perfect squares. But as you move back farther away from the viewer, the squares become skinnier and become smaller and smaller rectangles as you move farther away. The same with the background is true. In the foreground, it's all very, very solid lines. It's very detailed. But the farther back into the painting you get, it becomes much less detailed. You can see outlines, but you can't actually make out what the shapes are exactly, and you can't make out the detail in them. Another thing that I would like to talk to is the forms. There are many different types of forms in this portrait. There are the figurative forms as the 4 people. There are natural forms as the trees, the leaves, the river in the background, the mountains, the hills. And there's also built forms, as you can see that there is a city behind them. There are architectural forms and buildings. And even though you can't make them out in great detail, you know that it is built forms. And even the chessboard is a built form because somebody created that. They hand sculpted all of the chess pieces. It's all very, very handmade and man-made. One of the really big things that stands out about this painting, though, is the color. The colors are so vibrant, especially the red sleeves on the eldest sister. They really stand out against the natural earthy tones in the background of the trees and the leaves, and even the grayish background. Then the middle sister with the very, very dark dress with the yellow sleeves, that stands out a lot. You can tell that they are the main subjects because your eye is drawn to the pop of color that is on them. One thing that's interesting I find about the painting is I believe that the youngest daughter or youngest sister has white around her neck to represent her innocence since she is the youngest. She has an innocent smile. She hasn't been corrupted because she's still so young. And even though the governess is also wearing a white, that white more blends into the sky that is behind her and the mountains that are behind her. So even though she is there, you can tell she blends more into the background. So she's not as an important part of the painting as the three sisters are. Another thing that you can look at is the light coming from it. You can tell the light is coming from where the viewer is because the sides of the face closest to the viewer are really lit up. But as you move across the face, it becomes shadowed and darker. This is an example of chiaroscuro, of using the light and dark to create a three-dimensional shape on a 2D plane. Another thing that I see is the texture. You can see in the dresses of the girl, they look like very rough textures. You can tell that if you like moved your hand across them, it was a very rough feeling dress. And it looks like it's very expensive clothing too. This contrasts against the faces of the girls, which look very smooth and unblemished. And even the chessboard, which looks like you could glide your hand across it and have a very smooth feeling. Another thing that stands out is the pattern. There are lots of patterns. Once again, the dresses all have very ornate patterns on their arms. They have very ornate patterns on the tablecloth. Even the hairs of the girls are in very ornate pattern braids. And finally, the chessboard. Between the yellow and black squares of the chessboard, it creates a pattern that really pulls everything together. And finally, here's my works cited page. Thank you so much.